All right, everyone. I know there's still probably a couple people trickling in, but we're so excited to have you today. I'm so excited for you to join us. My name is Caitlin Newell. I'm one of the resident data nerds here at NHSA, along with Victoria Jones, our Senior Director of Data. And today we wanted to invite you to learn a little bit more about cost modeling and how it might help answer some questions that you all might be facing, particularly if you're considering a change in scope or anticipating some other significant upcoming changes to your budget. So we're so excited to have you here today. I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Theresa Hawley. Dr. Hawley is the Executive Director at CELFE, the Center for Early Learning Funding Equity. She is an expert in early childhood programs and systems that support the school readiness and social competence of young children in poverty. And in her previous role as the Director of Early Childhood Transformation, in partnership with the Governor's Office, she directed the design of changes to Illinois' funding mechanisms and governance structure for early childhood education in partnership with the Governor's Office. So before that, she served in many other roles in Illinois throughout the early childhood system, including as a founding project director of an agency and as a consultant to programs and community collaborations across the country. So I'm so excited to have her here to talk with us today and to learn a little bit more about cost modeling with all of you. To get started, though, just so we can learn a little bit more about kind of where we're all coming from and how we're all approaching this topic, we have a couple polling questions that we'll just kind of throw up and get a little bit of information. So the first one is just, have you calculated your cost per child? And you can say yes, no, not sure, no wrong answers. And we'll give it about 30 seconds, and then we'll, because it's just a quick check. All right, about 10 more seconds, and then we'll close it up. Looks like we're mostly done. Can we show the results? All right, so I think maybe everyone can see it's about 2/3 say yes, about 2/3 say no, or about 1/3, say no or not sure. So a good mix in this group. You're in the right place. We're so excited to have you here. And we've got one more question. We'll go to the next one. Is everyone able to see the second question? Again, we'll spend just a couple more seconds on this one, let everyone answer, and then share the results. All right, Courtney, can we share the results of the second question?
They're being shared.
Oh.
You have about 33% saying yes, 53% saying no, and 14% saying not sure.
Perfect. Thank you. For some reason, it wasn't showing up on my end. I appreciate that. So it sounds like we're all coming with kind of a good mix of understandings of this topic, and it sounds like there's a lot that we can learn together. So that's very, very exciting. So to get started, Dr. Hawley, I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about your journey. I understand you had a little bit of an unusual path towards becoming an expert in early childhood cost modeling, which is a very particular way of cost modeling. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Sure. I am by background a developmental psychologist. So I got my doctorate in developmental psychology. I've always focused on policies and programs for children in poverty. And I've been a Head Start person for decades, working in Head Start programs in Chicago and on the national scene for a long time. But I have this sort of second love that's grown across the time of my career, which is a love of understanding how the money works in early childhood. And I haven't always been a love the money part of all of this. Part of this, I think, is that somewhere along the line, I fell in love with Excel. And I know that's a very strange thing to fall in love with, but I really did because to me, Excel is the ultimate what if tool. And my very favorite question is my children, when they were 2 or 3 years old, could even tell you is what if? I mean, my kids didn't ask why, they asked what if because their mother was always asking what if. So, I wasn't always so comfortable though with the numbers and with building out budgets and trying to understand how the money worked in this. In fact, I for a long time was a grant writer for Head Start programs particularly, but a lot of people who would write for federal and state grants. And I would tell my clients, I'll write your whole grant for you, but you got to get somebody else to do the budget because I don't know anything about that. I don't do budgets. I like, so if you are part of this webinar today and you're like, I'm a little uncomfortable with Excel, I don't really know. Believe me, I was there. It seemed a scary thing to me, but I was lucky that in my volunteer life, I became the chair of a school board of a brand new school that was opening. And because we were borrowing a lot of money to buy a building for our school, we had to have a 10-year budget for our program, and we happened to have somebody on our board who was great at building those. And so it built the whole thing out. And because I was a chair, I had to understand it. And I spent the time learning how it all worked. And again, I just fell in love with it. It's like, wow, that's amazing that you can do all those things with Excel. So, from that time, I moved into state government, and when I got to the Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development, and as part of the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant running things, the first thing I wanted to understand is if we built this system that we all say we want, how much would it cost? And that's what really got me into cost modeling and doing the laying out of how much does it really cost to do the services that we want to provide families.
Amazing. And I know that as part of your work as the founding project director, starting up a new Birth to Five Head Start program, you started building cost models as part of your work there. Can you tell me a little bit about that school and why you started with a cost model during that process?
Sure. So we were at, again, part of my a little bit volunteer life, a little bit my consulting life before I went into state government, was working with a foundation that wanted to start a state-of-the-art Birth to Five early childhood school, and that was, fully bilingual, super high quality in the suburbs of Chicago. And we knew we had partnerships with a Head Start grantee, with the school district. We knew we had certain sources of revenue that we could draw upon. But we also knew there were going to be economies of scale. Like we couldn't do a program that was only going to be 4 classrooms or whatever. Before we built the building, we had to figure out how many classrooms of 0 to 3-year-olds and how many classrooms of 3 to 5-year-olds were we going to be able to sustainably support in this building? What would be the right balance of it? Should we do 6 and 6? Should we do 8 and 8? What would it look like if you did that? In order to answer that question, I built a model. I built an Excel model to say, if we do 4 classrooms, what is it? If we do 6 classrooms, and one that would calculate that all out for me automatically. And that was sort of the start of my getting into cost modeling.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure that this wasn't a once and done kind of activity for your center, as I'm sure it wasn't for anyone else on this call. So tell me a little bit about how things changed and adapted over time.
Yeah. When the program opened, was right at the same time that I went into state government. So I left this program. I went into state government for a few years. I came back after those few years. Many things had changed in the program. One of the things that changed is like none of the Head Start funding had gone up. The same dollars per child pretty much across time. None of the state funding had gone up. It turned out we weren't getting as many kids getting childcare assistance in the program as we had originally budgeted for. And I came back on the board of this organization. I'm like, ruh-roh. If we start looking at even a little into the future here, we're going to be in trouble. And at the same time, there was an expansion of early Head Start that was out there ready for bid. We had to decide, did we want to go for that? There was a lot of need and pressure for creating more infant toddler slots in the community. We needed to figure out what would be a better and more sustainable financing solution, and maybe a different mix of classrooms that we needed to do for this program if we were going to be able to sustain it in the long term. So back to building cost models that could help us forecast that and look at that in our program across time.
So after you built kind of this series of what if machines, these series of models to say, what if we do this? What if we do with this? What do we do this? What happened? How is the program doing now?
The program is thriving. I think that it is we people laugh at me because they did a study in our state of there's multiple different funding streams right in our state, and they said how many programs are drawing down all of them. And this program was there at the top of the list as the program in the state that was drawing down the most funding streams and the biggest combination of them. And the program is thriving. I think, it hasn't had to reduce services and has not had to turn away kids. It is stable and doing well. Now, that said, are they still facing the same kind of problems that every Head Start program is, of not necessarily being able to pay the same wages that the local school districts are, and needing to up those wages and compensation? For sure. Are they facing the same problems of needing more staffing because more kids are coming in with special needs into their program than were before? For sure. So I think, that this discipline of really keeping track of what your expenses are over time and what that in relation to what these funding streams are, something that they continue to do in the program to make sure that they are, future-proofing themselves, making sure that they're getting ahead of the problem and not waiting for the problem to blow up.
I really appreciate you sharing a little bit about how you have seen cost models really have a lot of transformative power for programs in terms of, like you said, future proofing and building for this long-term sustainability. So it's actually, I'll hand it over to you to talk a little bit about the differences between not just having a budget, but the cost model, and kind of how you distinguish between those, and walking us through a little bit about what that looks like. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, I am now spend most of my time as a consultant to states and to programs around the country. And so consultants never come without a slide deck. So I do have a slides here to talk about some things, and then I'm going to talk through show you some actual budgets and some ways that you can use these concepts and these tools as you move forward. So, yeah, everyone seeing what I am putting up on the screen here? Great. Okay, so what we're going to talk about here is moving from a budget, which is we're all very familiar with, that is really a kind of a set of static numbers where you're laying out how much money do we need to spend in all these different categories in order to be able to operate our program. Moving from there to a cost model that's built more as this sort of what if machine that helps you to look at what might be different if you changed your mix of services, if you changed the mix of revenues that you have and the expenditures, and how does that all tie together? So we're going to talk through a little bit about the difference between just figuring out your operating costs and where it goes to being operating costs per child. I'm going to pull down these slides for a second, and hold on a second. Switching among these might be a little trickier than I gave myself credit for. All right, are you guys seeing a budget? All right. So a basic program budget, I think everyone on this webinar would be very familiar with, right? You have all your different kinds of revenue, you have all the different expenses that you would have, and then you kind of have a bottom line here. So this is essentially the program I was talking to you about. This is an old budget that I pulled out of my mothballs to be able to use to play around with here today. So you have this basic budget where you have all your revenue, you have all your different expenses. Most of us also know about having a cost allocated budget, right? So you can't, when you go to report to your on your federal Head Start grant, or you go to report on your state pre-K grant, or any other grant that you might have, you need to say exactly how much of the money that they're giving you is spent on all these different categories. So A Head Start program almost certainly has this, a version of a cost allocated budget where you're taking each of those different expenses. And here I showing you in a lot more detail here, but all these different expenses laid against all of the different funding streams that you have to report back those specific expenditures on, right? But that doesn't actually tell you an answer to a question like, what is my cost per 0 to 3-year-old? Or what is my cost per 3 to 5-year-old in my program? In order to understand that, you need to do a different kind of cost allocating. To do that, you're going to have to do more of an allocating of expenses across the age groups or the different program categories that you might have. What I'm showing you here is when we go to do a cost per child budget for this program has 2 buildings, one that has the main site that has 6 preschool classrooms and 6 birth to 3 classrooms. And then it has a satellite site that has 4 classrooms in it. And what I'm showing you here is that the costs in running those programs might be a little different in the satellite site. So we're breaking them out. This cost per child budget, you're going to assign expenses to each of these different age groups. The way that you do that, and I'm going to come back to my slide for a second. When you're thinking about doing operating cost per child, you could do it just by taking your total budget of your whole center or your whole Head Start program and divide it by the number of kids that you serve and say, close enough. That's my cost per child. But boy, if you serve 0 to 3-year-olds and 3 to 5-year-olds, if you have both early Head Start and Head Start programming, or if you have part day Head Start programming and full day or full school day, or plus ones that have extended day year round, those are all very different costs per child. And so what you really need to do is to take your total budget for a particular age group or program model and divide that by the number of kids that are served in that model. To do that, you got to answer a question for yourself. How do you reasonably distribute the full cost of the program across those different classrooms or program models or age groups of kids? What I'm showing you here is that there probably are a couple different ways that you would break out those expenses. You can break out a lot of expenses just on a per classroom basis, right? So you're going to assign your teaching staff and their particular salaries to the age group that you're serving or to the program model that they're working on. So in your case, you may have 3 teachers in each of your infant toddler rooms and 2 in your, or 2.5 FTE or something like that in your preschool room. So you're assigning specifically those teachers to that age group. You can assign things like equipment, occupancy costs, all those kind of things. A lot of those things you can pretty much just break up your whole building by the number of classrooms that you're serving. Other things, though, don't break out very well on a per classroom basis. You're going to really want to look at them per child. And the biggest one here, I think, is food. So obviously, if you have a classroom of 20 preschoolers, they are going to cost you a lot more for food than a classroom of 8 toddlers are, right? So you're going to want to break out those expenses more by child. And so what you do is you go to your budget here, and you think through, for each expense that you have, are you going to break that out by classroom? Are you going to break it out by child? And here I just have like percentage of salaries that your fringe benefits or something is, you just kind of tie that to the salaries that end up in each of those categories. So what I've done in this budget here is go through and for every kind of expense, decide, am I going to average that out as per child across the whole center? So here, IT cost. I'm just going to take the $118,000, divide it by the how many kids there are total in the center, and then multiply by the number of kids in that age group to get that expense for them. You've done this across all of this, then you come down, you total it all up. Your whole budget here is now being allocated across the different programs, the different parts of it, and you can see what your cost per child is. And again, here, the big difference between the cost per child in a preschool classroom versus a birth to 3 classroom, because obviously here you have, in this case, 17 children in the classroom, in this case, 8. But also the two different sites have a little bit different cost structures. This is a more expensive building to operate and more going on in this building. So over at this site, it's even though they have to pay rent, it might be a little bit cheaper to operate. So you can build out and really understand what your cost per child is by taking your budget and building it out this way. That doesn't actually get you to a what if machine though, right? Now I've just answered the question, which 2/3 of the people coming in here said you have done that. You've done this. You figured out this cost per child. Now, maybe some of you haven't done it quite this broken out, but you certainly could. You can figure out how to break out and allocate your costs across all of this. Where you want to go from here is get to the kind of stuff that I was talking about doing with our program that I helped start up is you want to build out a cost model that can say, but what if we change the number of classrooms that we have for preschoolers, or we add more infant toddler classrooms and we, by getting another site? You need to understand that you can't just say, oh, my cost per child for doing infants is, I'm going back down here. My cost per child for doing infants is $40,000 a year. It would cost me $40,000 a year more to add more infants to my program. It might not. Some of your costs might change, some of your costs might not change. So what we recommend and what we do when we work with folks is to build out a model that really stops and thinks each expense that you have in your program. Would this go up if you added more classrooms, if you added more children to your program? Would it not go up? And you can build your model to take that into account. A good example of this is you pay for an audit for your program. The audit costs are probably just the audit costs. They're not going to go up a lot if you add more kids to your program, or the cost of the system that you have, and you pretty much are paying that, and it may not go up that much if you add more classrooms. But other things definitely will. If you add more classrooms, you're going to have more supply costs for sure, and you want to add that in. You're going to have more insurance costs if you have more children that you're serving. So some costs, like accreditation fees, may not increase, but other ones do. And so you want to build out your cost estimation model, really thinking through these unit costs. Some things vary by child, some things vary by classroom, some things by staff members, professional development costs, and some things are just really per center or per program. But if you add a new site, you might have more expenses for that. So what you're doing is trying to answer the question, if you were to add or subtract classrooms or children for the program, what costs would change and how? I'm going to show you what that looks like in a budget here, and how it's a little bit different. What we have here is a cost model now built out, not just to say, oh, this was my total cost and I divided by my number of classrooms, but rather we know how much per classroom the cost of staffing is. In this particular program, their birth to 3 and 3 to 5-year-old classrooms were all staffed with a lead teacher, assistant teacher, and an aide, all with very similar salaries, whether you were birth to 3 or 3 to 5. So I can do it across age groups like this. If you have different, you would have to build your model differently. But this has all of the different costs per classroom built in here, per child costs for insurance, for example. That's going to vary by child. Supplies will vary by child. Some things like diapers are really only if you have infants, right? You don't have diapers for the preschoolers, generally speaking. Some things like this rent was only for the satellite site, some things for the main site. So I built out this whole little simplified sort of cost model across this program. Why would I bother to do all of this work and build all this stuff out? Because I want to see if things change when I change the numbers on here. And I forgot to fix this, so don't pay attention to that. You want to know, though, not just your expenses, you want to also understand how it changes on your revenue. So what I built in here is per child revenue as well for this program. I've built in things like our state pre-K program, state 0 to 3 funding, CACFP. Here in this program, I know this program has a Head Start grant. Again, these are pretty much made up numbers, but this program has a Head Start program, and we're going to say, I'm assuming I can't get any more Head Start funding. There's no grant competition. There's no new way of getting more funding for the Head Start. So that one isn't going to change. But in this case, if I add more kids with subsidy, I can get more revenue. If I add more kids on the state pre-K program, I could get the funding. I could draw that down. That's how this is built. All right, I'm going to take a breath here, Caitlin. I'm going to let you ask me some questions about this model because, again, this is how you build out, and all this is built so that if we change one thing in it, other things in the model change. Like if I take away a preschool classroom, that changes all these costs in the preschool column. It changes my overall revenue, my overall expenses for the program, and it kind of can show me whether I'm making more or less of a break even on this program.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Hawley. I really appreciate the way you put this together. I know it's a lot of numbers, but it is really illustrative to see moving from, a cost allocated budget, which I, come from a program background. I've seen those seem familiar, but then to move to, okay, which of these things vary by child, classroom, or program or center? And then to be able to go in and ask them questions. So if you don't mind, I have a few questions just to see how this would work. So like, for example, you showed us like if we're closing a preschool classroom, for example, what that would look like. But I imagine that some people are thinking about what happens if I'm having trouble filling my preschool classrooms and I want to repurpose those for a birth to 3. So converting a Head Start classroom into early Head Start classroom. How could this model help me answer, is that viable? Am I able to keep my doors open if I do that?
Sure. So what we would do in that case, we'd probably think about, this birth to 3 satellite site, it's built out to be birth to 3. So we're probably not going to be able to make many changes there, but maybe in the main building, we could convert, let's say we wanted to convert 2 of the classrooms from being preschool classrooms to being birth to 3 classrooms. Okay. And we're going to assume we can't get our hands on any more early Head Start money that our Head Start grant is going to be what it is. They're going to allow us to use the whole Head Start grant. We're just going to change the way we're serving things. But it might make a difference in what state pre-K funding we're pulling down when we do this. So let's just change it. We're going to say that this is only going to be 4 classrooms, and this is going to be 8 birth to 3 classrooms.
I can see all the numbers changing. That's cool.
Rut-row.
Yep.
Rut-row. That's not going to go so well for our program. I don't know, now I look at that and I'm like, well, what might I be able to do? What might I be able to change here about the way that this is all set up so that it could be successful if I did that? Go ahead.
No, I was saying, I think that's a good point, that the next question for people facing this is probably, what can I do differently? Because if we're thinking about converting classrooms, it's because those first classrooms aren't filling. Like that's not meeting the community need right now. So it's like, then, yeah, what would you do to think about what you could do to fill that gap?
Well, one thing is, in this particular program, this is all set up as a full day year-round early Head Start program, right? It really is targeting working families. It doesn't have a whole lot of a home visit component of the program. It's really targeting working families. You can see here that our assumptions in this model of how many kids are going to receive childcare subsidy are really pretty low. It's only about 40% of the program. And that's sort of built out because I think a lot of the preschool classrooms in particular have had a hard time attracting families who are eligible for our child care assistance program, but also still low income enough to qualify for the Head Start program. It's less of a challenge with the younger kids, and especially we do in this community have a lot of younger families that that have pretty low incomes, even though they're working full time, and a lot of single parent families. What if we were able to get this up to 70% of our kids actually getting childcare subsidy? Would that help our program succeed? So what you see here is like, I just changed the 70%. It's all built in a model here to say now, you're getting the zero or the childcare subsidy money for 70% of the kids, that changes the revenue that we're getting for childcare subsidy and shows us that actually we might be able to make this conversion work if we're able to find and get enough kids into the subsidy program. We might want to even just say, all right, how much more do I need to get it to? And this is where you just play. What if it was 60%? Would 60% get me there? What? Pretty much 60%. So now I've answered the question. If I was going to convert 2 of my classrooms from being preschool classrooms to birth to 3 classrooms, and I was able to get the state 0 to 3 funding for those new 0 to 3 classrooms, what percent of them would I need to have childcare assistance across my 0 to 3 program for me to have a chance of breaking even?
That's very interesting. And I can really see how this kind of what if budget tool moves pretty quickly into programmatic decisions, for example. So, like, is that something where it's like, okay, we're going to dedicate some of the time of our family support specialists to reaching out to families to help them sign up for childcare subsidy if they're eligible and don't know it and haven't taken advantage of it yet. I know I've seen programs, again, when they're trying to move towards closing that gap of like, okay, we need to get more people on subsidy. We know a lot of our families would qualify, but perhaps are not aware of this. So then we kind of move in that direction. So that's very exciting to see. One question I have, and I should preface for the group, I'm in a state that does not have a state pre-K supplemental funding. How would this look for those of us who maybe don't have that, but are working on advocacy efforts to add more state pre-K funding?
Well, I think, a really great way that you can, just in this model here, is I can just tell you what would happen if we didn't have any funding from the state pre-K in this program, when we were just trying to survive on what Head Start was giving us and trying to run the program at the quality level that we're talking about. I can just zero that out. And you can see pretty quickly, I got a serious problem on my hands. Or if the state is saying, you know what, we've been paying $7,500 a year, but we can't do that anymore. We're only going to pay $6,500 a year. I'm going to set these guys back to the 6 and 6 that we started at, and at the 40 across the board. I can go to them and say, all right, this is, the original total revenue, or originally where we are. This is what it's going to cost us. It's going to put us $100,000 in the hole if you, the state, lower our state pre-K funding from $7,500 a child to $6,500. Conversely, obviously, you can build in what kind of quality features you want into this model that maybe you can't currently afford, and you can sort of figure out what level of state funding you really need to be advocating for so that you're able to get the to do what you need to do. I know that a lot of programs have face the challenge of how are they going to get to that full day of services, whether it's a full school day of services or it's a full day year-round program that families need in your community. One of the ways that a lot of folks have done that is by building this partnership with state pre-K. And so a model like this could help you lay out, what if I did a different program out? I recognize, like, I'm showing you a lot of things that may seem really overwhelming, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to show you a different model that I built out for somebody that was really trying to ask these very questions for their program. It was actually a program that that was starting as just a state pre-K program. I was wondering whether it would be worth it to add Head Start to their program.
Could you full screen for a second? It's a little small.
It's a little small. Yep.
Yeah, I maybe even zoom a bit. Thank you.
There we go. All right. This program, I'm going to go back to the beginning of it. This program, like I said, started out as all state pre-K, 7 classrooms of state pre-K, and the state pre-K money was nowhere near enough money for them to break even on the expenses that they had. This model was not working for them. They came to me and asked the question of, like, well, what if we did some other model? What's a way that we might be able to bring more federal and state dollars into our program. But they said, look, we recognize that it's not so simple as to say, what if we got some Head Start money in there and think that all that money was going to go to the bottom line, right? It's more expensive to run Head Start than it is to run a program that just meets state pre-K standards. Or, what if we took the program and we extended the day of the program by bringing in some childcare assistance dollars? How might that change our program? This model is pretty complicated, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but what I can tell you is that we were able to build out a model that looked at like what staffing changes would have to happen on a sort of per classroom basis if you were going to add Head Start to the mix of the program. What staffing changes might you need to do if you were going to have an extended day, so and an extended year, so you're not at 180 days, but you're at 240 days a year? Or if you try to blend all three funding streams, what might that look like? How does that impact your expenses and your revenue? And how does that help you get to a model that might work? And this one is built out with a lot more tabs, a lot more ways that there's disciplines to this of how you set these models up. I'm going to just click through these. None of this is tremendously complex Excel. I'll tell you, I am an intermediate Excel user. I'm not a super expert Excel user. And so this is not way high-end stuff. We can build all this out and to show you that like a lot of models don't particularly work unless they were going to be able to get some philanthropic money to fill a hole, which this program thought that they could maybe do. They thought they could maybe get $150,000 a year and that kind of thing. This model then pushes them to say, gee, the only ways that this is going to work across these 7 classrooms is if we bring in some extended day, if we bring in some Head Start, and helps them to think about what their option set is as they build out their program.
One thing that's really standing out to me, Dr. Hawley, and I've seen a couple messages in the chat that I think echo this, is that like you said, the Excel math is not wildly complex, but what is pretty necessary is having a really deep knowledge of what's possible in your community. Like when we were talking about, we think we can get more subsidy than we're currently, a higher percentage of subsidy than we're currently getting. Can you talk a little bit from your experience about what kind of knowledge you had to have about your community when you were building the cost model, or some of the questions that you ask clients when you're consulting?
Sure. Yeah. The thing that strikes me often when I work with a client like this, and I will come to them and ask them, how much childcare assistance money do you get for infants and toddlers? And how much do you get for preschoolers? And the answer is often like, I don't know, I get this much overall. Okay, well, you actually are going to have to go back and analyze your data to understand, one, whether you're already seeing a difference. Like maybe what was really, this program, okay, they think it's 40% overall. Maybe what was really already happening was that this was and this was 50%, right? So if that's true, I have to know that to start with, that's where we are currently in this with the families that are using childcare assistance. Several things you need to know. In our state, we don't have a waiting list. So if you're a state that has a waiting list, you really can't do this of saying, we'll just get more kids to be on subsidy, because you may not have the ability to get that. If there's a waiting list, you may not be able to add more children to your program, or it's really spotty of whether you're going to be able to get that revenue. You do have to definitely understand, and this is what the community needs assessment is all about, understanding how many of the families really do need that full day year-round care and are able and willing to apply for the child care assistance. And it's a challenging feature of today's environment. I know there's a lot of providers out there who say we've got, especially among our infants and toddlers, we know 70% of them are eligible for child care assistance, but only 20% of them are willing to fill out that paperwork. And because of the concerns, of undocumented families or other situations that they may be facing. And though that's very real, that's another way you might look at this situation, is to say, hey, I want to understand what's going to happen to us as people are facing redeterminations, as we change over families, and way fewer families are willing to or able to apply for child care assistance in my program. What happens if it goes to 25% across the board? And you can see that for this program that's been counting on that as a revenue source, that's a major hit. And so that's something that you can look at and be able to understand sort of in advance, to understand what kind of budget hole you might be facing because of the situations that are happening on the ground now.
I think one of the things that stands out to me is the ways in which this could be used, like you said, to kind of preview changes that might be coming down from the state or federal governments. So, for example, I live in a state where at various points there have been changes to licensing and to ratios for their licensing in ways that maybe allow you to have one more child per 4-year-old classroom, and how that might change. Or if there's a place where there's a pre-K partnership with the local ISD that's being offered, and the ISD is approaching this program to say, hey, this might be a source of additional funding. But I liked what you said earlier, like, we kind of need to know, is it actually going to go to the bottom line, or are there hidden costs associated with it that make it not such a good deal? And then how could we address those? How can we work with our ISD partners to think about how to make that work? Have you had any clients who've done that, asked some of those questions about the mixed delivery pre-K partnerships with ISDs?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, the client that I was showing a moment ago, that really is essentially what they were trying to figure out. Should they, in their case, it was, should they go to the Head Start provider,
it's the other
right?
way. Yeah.
It's the other way around. Should they go to the Head Start provider and ask to add those slots in? And I think if we just look at column C and D here, look at the difference between keeping all of the classrooms just state pre-K, and then or having 3 of them be Head Start. Now, in this community that they were serving, I didn't even put the option of putting all 7 of them as being Head Start as well, because there was no way that this place was going to be able to recruit all children who were eligible for Head Start. It was not that kind of community. It was low income, but it wasn't enough of the children under the poverty level. The Head Start revenue that they would get, that we calculated out, with some assumptions, was about $500,000, but there were another couple $100,000 worth of expenses that we had to assume that they would have, because they were adding the Head Start requirements. More intensive family engagement than our state preschool program requires, although the program that they were on, it requires fairly decent family engagement, but certainly more overhead expenses, more administrative expenses, more program management expenses. And so we look at that and say, oh yeah, there's a difference here. It's better for your bottom line, but not as better as you would think just looking at the revenue. And obviously it works in reverse. A Head Start program might be able to think about that. What might be the difference in expenses when you go to state pre-K versus Head Start? Well, you may have to have all of your teachers be BA level with a teaching certificate, right? And that may require you, in order to be competitive in your marketplace, to have higher wages for those staff. Or there may be some, I don't know, it's hard to come up with too many things that are more expensive than Head Start just because you're state pre-K, but there certainly can be some.
So as we're thinking about, I'm sure a lot of listeners on the call are thinking about, how do I build something like this for myself? I've heard you talk about, like, this is built in Excel. It's relatively straightforward formulas. But some of the things that I've heard you mention that programs would need is the ability to, like, kind of deeply dig into their current budget, and a real understanding of which children are taking advantage of kind of which different services and all of those different sources of revenue. And so that deep community knowledge, that deep program knowledge, and then it sounds like someone who is comfortable with this analytic background. Can you talk a little bit about what
Yeah,
else?
where do you find them, right? I,
Yeah.
you know, the first, if I was a smaller community level Head Start program without a big large agency behind me. If you have the big large agency behind you, there's probably someone in your agency who does this kind of work and who will be able. And we saw it on our poll in the beginning. Lots of people have 5-year forecasts. Lots of people have these things calculated out and have done this. If they know how to do that, they probably can figure out how to build this more what if version of a system. But if you don't, who might be on your board that a good accountant probably knows how to do this. Who might be, in your circle, in your community that could do this? Can you go to your community foundation and ask them if they are in connection with consulting services that do pro bono work for not-for-profit. This is a pretty good and easy pro bono project for someone to be able to do for you. Somebody who is a financial analyst, for example, or would have a good idea of how to do this kind of stuff. Somebody who works for a bank, works on loans and all of that kind of stuff. Your CDFI, the agency that is, the Community Development Finance Institute, I think that's what they're called. The places that you might go for capital to be able to expand your program and that are there to help community development. They may have people on their staff who can help you build these kind of models, because these are the kind of models you have to be able to document that you can pay back a loan. And also going to your local university, this is a great project for like somebody who's in an MBA class or a finance class or something like that. Often they're looking for these kind of group projects that they could have people do that have real world impact. This is a great kind of project like that, to have them come in, help you analyze your financial data to get some of those answers to the questions, like you were saying, Caitlin. How many kids are getting subsidy? How many by age? How does that vary? That can help you build out the building blocks of a model like this.
I really appreciate you kind of laying out all those different places where people could go to for more support. And also realizing that would be a dialogue between whoever you were working with, because you can find someone who's really great at doing these cost models, and you all on the call are the ones with the expertise in what
Right.
are those Head Start program questions. Head Start is its own beast. We know that. And so I think that's exactly right. If you go to them with these questions, they can build you the what if machine that will help you answer them. With our last couple minutes, I did want to make some space for questions, and I see some in the chat. But also, if we want to all come off mute, I think we could ask some questions. So the one I see in the chat that I'll start with is it reasonable to assume average salaries for teachers, TAs, et cetera, or would it be better to just list salaries person by person?
So what we usually do when we build a model is that we build out each position separately, 0 to 5 teacher, or 0 to 3 teacher, 3 to 5 teacher, teacher assistant, whatever would be, whatever is on your wage scale, anything different. And then we'll put in an average wage for them, because you don't know year to year, and you don't know, like you may have different people assigned to different classrooms over time and stuff. So we usually in the cost modeling put in the averages rather than the individuals. I know when you write your budget for your year, you make your list of all your staff and their exact salaries, because you have to budget for exactly how much you're going to pay each of them. But when you're thinking about the what if machine, you're going to have to go with averages for different positions. We did a little practicing of this back and forth, Caitlin and I had the original budget up that had all the different positions and everything, and both of us were like, we can't show that. So we lumped it all together and kind of just showed salaries. That's when I really build a what if machine, I lay it out in more detail than that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Please feel free to raise your hand. Don't call on you or drop it in the chat.
Or tell us your experience. I would love to
Yeah.
hear other people's stories of having done some what if forecasting and what it meant for your program.
We did some
Right.
what ifing, and it led us to determine kind of the minimum number of classrooms we could have in one location. So we've been looking at some spaces with maybe three or
Yeah,
four potential rooms, and then we realized we had to have five, or we couldn't do it.
couldn't
So
do
I
it.
think, and that's like older. I feel like we haven't done that in a while, and part of why I'm here is because I think we got to dust everything off and check our assumptions again. Like once you do it, doesn't mean that's always what it is.
That's absolutely right. Things change.
Thank you, Melanie. And I see Lauren had a question. Lauren, are you able to come off mute and ask?
Yes, sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand.
You're totally fine. Thank
I'm
you.
also very into Excel, Teresa. What I've previously been doing is I find myself creating a lot of different workbooks and then trying to kind of work them in together. I
Mhm.
noticed on yours you had plenty of tabs. Do you find it easier to just do it all in the same workbook?
Yeah. Yes. And over time, I have break even, all that. That really had one tab for revenue and one tab for expenses. Um, then I learned over time that it actually works better if you build out the model with these multiple tabs for each sort of part of your cost model. I'll pull this one up again. This is a slightly different version of the one I showed you a couple minutes ago that's built out oh, this is the same one. Okay, so this one here, this is one I was showing you previously. This is built out, so we have enrollment, and like how many classrooms of each type do we have, revenue sources, tuition rates, things like that. And then that multiplies out the revenue on this page. We have a staffing pattern that then and staff salaries that combine to give us our personnel costs. Like each step in the calculation in this model is built out into its own tab. This makes it cleaner and clearer to be able to follow what's going on. My earliest versions of things, like if you clicked on the one of these cells here, it would have a formula that was as long as you as can be. And that's a great way of doing it. It's much better to go kind of step by step here. So here are all my staff salaries. Here's my staffing pattern. And this is the page that multiplies the staffing pattern by the staff salaries for that. And it can build it out over time. So that I do recommend doing the much more multi-tab version of this. I built this model out as well to be able to show how cost changes over time. So this one is built with inflators in it, so you can build year by year what it looks like. I also find that that's way better to build out in a multi-tab format to be able to understand it over time.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. I see a couple other comments in the chat that I just want to lift up. Someone mentioned that they would love to see a model like this to use as a basis for developing their own. That's great feedback. Like I said in the chat, we are going to be sending out a survey in kind of the follow-up after this webinar, where we're asking programs to share a little bit more about what are those type of resources that people would like. We started this webinar a little bit to see, like, is this meeting a need? Would this be helpful to kind of develop more resources around? And so if that's something that you all are interested in, to have kind of one that's a model and kind of a blank slate that you can start customizing and playing with, please let us know, because that might be something that we could attempt to work on, depending on people's responses. I also saw a chat saying this would be interesting to apply to the Head Start change in scope applications or for combining multiple Head Start grants. I think that's exactly on target with how a lot of people might be thinking about how to use this, as there are these big changes and big programmatic changes that people might be considering. I see someone else said yes to a model blank slate with instructions, please. So we appreciate all your feedback. We'll take all that back and follow up. Any other questions, comments? things that
or success stories by using
yes.
something. I know like so many people said, yes, you've built out a multi-year model for your program. I'd love to hear, how you built that and who you had build it for you and what it's done for you.
I see Pamela has raised a hand.
Hi. Somebody had asked if you would be willing to share the model, but also there were just a couple sheets and I couldn't write quick enough. You just had shared, I think it was just like the per child cost based on like samples of it, like food supplies, things like that. Can you share that as well?
Sure. So different, I'll show you the one from this model I was building for this center that was trying to figure out whether it should add Head Start. They had the great budget for me to be able to pull from and had some really good data, but like there's a lot of things in here like hearing and vision screenings, counseling, so like we put in a dollar amount per child. Now, how did we come up with all of that? Some of it is judgment. Some of it, sometimes you go to a catalog and you add it up what you think it will be. But you guys do this all the time anyway on budgets that you're creating for a grant or whatever it may be. I can make that a little bit bigger as well. But you just think through all your different categories here. They may be the categories you already have in your budget. And then you can look at, how many dollars is that per child? Now, let's say you had something in here where you only have to do it for the infants and toddlers. You don't have to do it for the preschoolers. You can write your formula in this cell in a way that will account for that. In this case, it's just going total enrollment towards times the number of kids, but it can be, you can use if statements to make it only the infants and toddlers on there. But I'll scroll slowly through this. These are all the sort of different costs. Some things CRC are laid as center. They don't change. These are changing with inflation here, but they don't change if you change the number or the kind of classrooms that you have, or even the number of classrooms, because this place had space to add another 2 or 3 classrooms. That was another thing we were looking at. They didn't want to add more classrooms because they were losing money on every classroom they had. So that wasn't what we were modeling out. But yeah, so you can figure out how you build these and what they vary by center or by child or by classroom. The other thing that was important for this one as well, there were a bunch of things that were just startup expenses, and helping them see that those were only really going to be in year 1, and they were going to be the same no matter what their program was important for them to understand as well.
Thank you.
But a good business analyst can help you dig into your data this way and your existing budget, and help you understand how you're going to set those parameters so that you can build the right what if machine.
So I think we're in our last couple minutes. If there's any additional questions you want to get in under the wire, please put them in the chat. And if we've got a couple minutes, I'll answer them. But I did want to start wrapping up and be respectful of everyone's time and say thank you, all of you, for joining. We really appreciate how thoughtfully you interacted with us. We hope this was helpful. Again, there will be a survey coming out, so please do let us know what else you would like to know about this topic. We would love to keep this conversation going. And as always, thank you to Dr. Hawley and to the CELFE team for kind of walking us through some of this. We really appreciated the conversation.
You can do it.
We can. So thank you so much. We look forward to hearing from all of you about what happens next and talking again soon. So thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.